Christian parenting.
Welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast. We are Jeff and Terra Matson, a husband and wife team who is shrinking the integrity gap in our own lives and helping others do the same. I'm a leadership and organizational development coach, and Terra is a licensed marriage and family therapist.
We believe that if you have a following, you are a leader, and how you lead matters. Whether you are leading in the home, work, or community, we are bringing you biblical, clinical, and relational wisdom to help you in every relationship that matters most to you. None of us do this perfectly, but we are leaning into the reality of our humanity and profound wisdom of grace.
Well, we're thrilled to have another husband and wife team with us today as we talk about shrinking our integrity gaps in our marriages. We have Dave and Ann Wilson, who've been married for more than 38 years and have spent the last 33 teaching and mentoring couples and parents across the country. They are the Family Life Today radio hosts, co-founders of the Kensington Church, a national multi-campus church that hosts more than 14,000 visitors every weekend.
The Wilsons have been the creative force behind a DVD teaching series, Rock Your Marriage, and the Survival Guide to Parenting, as well as authors of the book, Vertical Marriage. They are the parents of 3 grown boys, a granddaughter, and live in the Detroit area. I had the privilege of meeting the Wilsons when I actually did an interview with Family Life Today for Courageous. And Dave, you actually threw me a football in the studio, which was a first for me. So welcome to the Living Wholehearted podcast.
We're glad to be here. And if I could, I'd throw another football across the country.
Terra, you are really...
I would love it.
You're really good at throwing it.
My eyes would be open.
Thanks.
Okay, you two, you have a breadth of wisdom to offer today. We know that. We're so grateful to have you here. But before we dive in, we just want to know what you two do for fun outside of all the ministries you partner in. Maybe share some hobbies or latest shifts in your stage of life. What's life like in Detroit? Help our audience get to know you.
You already heard the football thing. We sort of like football. I was the Detroit Lions chaplain for 33 seasons, which makes me the record holder of the most losses in the NFL by a chaplain. And I wish I was kidding. I'm not kidding. Somebody in my church emailed me and did the research and said, I've lost more games than any other chaplain. And we had one of our sons played for the Lions. And so we've done a lot. I coach high school football for 15 years. So football's been a lot of fun. And Ann's an avid tennis player. And we love to play tennis and pickleball.
Yeah,
work out.
We just started playing pickleball.
Yeah. Which
has been really fun, actually. We're both pretty competitive, and sometimes we get in fights when we compete. So
no, I'm not competitive at all. My wife is competitive. I don't really care about winning. I just like to play the game and smile.
Although we were in our basement the other day working out, and I told Dave, let me see if I can tackle you.
Yeah, she did. I'm like, what are you doing right now? She starts diving at my leg like a single leg takedown.
I was so mad. I couldn't do it. I was like, this makes me so mad. I wanted to be able to do it, and I couldn't.
I love it. I love that competition. I'm sure that gets you guys in trouble a bit because we totally get that competitive piece. But honestly, tell us where you think that goes south quickly when you guys are starting to compete. I can hear a lot of fun in your marriage as well. But where does that go south?
Well, obviously it is a lot of fun. We've got some dents in the wall from throwing ping pong paddles when we miss a shot.
Not from me, just so you know.
My wife is the most intense table tennis player you've ever seen. You can't even poke her in the ribs because she is so intense. But obviously it's a lot of fun, but if you take it too far, you can get in trouble. If the game becomes too important to win, whether it's ping pong or even in your marriage, it can get you in trouble. So there definitely has to be a balance.
Because who does that?
I've never done that.
That's right. Who does that? I don't know. I don't know anything about this either.
Yeah, you guys have worked with so many marriages over the years. We rattled off a bit of your bio, but talk to us a little bit about the years that you've worked with couples, your own marriage. What do you think is one of the main struggles that couples have, particularly those that are strong-willed leader types who are passionate? Talk about that a bit.
I think Dave and we're pretty raw and honest about the struggles we've gone through, because we've gone through some real rough periods. And I think all couples go through peaks and valleys in their relationship. I think that can be really normal, just depending on what you're going through. Like when you have little kids, that is a hard phase when you're not getting sleep. But I think one of the things that we've seen, that we've encountered ourselves, is we really struggled with how to resolve conflict when we first got married. It is because our backgrounds are so different. The way we handle it is different. And so I think that's one of the main things that we've seen over the years of couples just missing it and how to communicate. So don't you think, Dave, that's been one of our big passions too?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a struggle in our marriage, and after 40 years, and as we sit down with couples or do marriage conferences around the country, you see the same thing. I mean, one of the marriage experts, John Gottman, has said resolving conflict is one of the keys to keeping a marriage together. Most couples are just like us. They know how to have conflict. Very few know how to resolve conflict. And we were kidding about, winning, but, there's different styles to conflict. And I married a winner. She likes to say, let's talk about it. And I was a withdrawer. I didn't know this when we got married, but I don't like conflict. So I would literally get up and walk out of the room and try to avoid it. Now, that's a terrible way to deal with conflict, because it doesn't go away. You just have to deal with it later. And I would literally walk out of the room, and my wife yelled at me one day, "Get back here and fight like a man." There we are. That was our first year of marriage. She's like, "Where are you going?"
And then she tackled you.
I might have called him a chicken too.
Yeah, she added that at the end.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah. Women do fight with our words. Yeah. That you were walking away and she was calling you to the table, but that was the first year of marriage.
Yeah. I mean, obviously things have changed in 40 years, but there's still that tendency, at least in me, to say, I'd rather not talk about it when I know that I need to come into the room, sit down and say, okay, we need to talk, and we need to work toward resolution, work toward forgiveness, work toward intimacy. And that's not going to happen if I walk out of the room. It's only going to happen if we sit down and roll up our sleeves and say, okay, conflicts, it's really hard, but it can be resolved if we do the work.
I think the other thing that I've seen with women, that I am so guilty of this, and I feel like I've really tried to get better, is that the whole issue of love and respect, which is so talked about over and over and over. But I think we as women, we have a tendency we can treat our husbands like we would treat one of our kids. Like, do this, don't do this. Dave and I had a conversation once where he told me that he felt like I always booed him. Like he couldn't do anything right. If he did do it right, I critiqued how he could have done it better. And I was so guilty of that. And I think in my mind, I think it starts in our heads. I was constantly seeing the negative. And I really see that with women, and I hear it with women as we talk to our husbands, and it just deflates our men. But I'm not sure that we are always confident in knowing how to do it in a way, how to speak truth and be loving at the same time.
That's a dynamic tension, isn't it? Yeah. And we think about this image that Dr. Gary Landreth shared before on focusing on the donut, not the whole. And it's such a powerful principle. You may have heard of him and heard of his work, but that principle before, he says the best way to focus in on conflict or address conflict is from actually spending most of the time focusing in on what's there, the donut, right? I love donuts, so it's easy for me to think about that. I'm hungry now for one, but yeah, focusing on what's there and affirming who the person is and saying, I know that from this, that you're this type of person, but this side is hard for me. And that frame is something that's certainly been helpful for us.
Yeah, talk a little bit more about that shift that happened. Maybe, Anne, you can start. Like, what was happening for you as you really did start moving from the thought process of not critiquing my husband in my head all the time, but actually shifting to saying truth? Like, this is hard for me, but also seeing the best of him.
Yeah,
What changed or
Yeah.
what is changing?
I want
Help us.
Ann to talk about that. That sounds good.
This
I'm on the edge of my seat,
This all
Ann.
started when I was asked to speak at our church to a MOPS group, Moms of Preschoolers. I said, Dave, you should go with me. This will be great. Come with me. And these women will love hearing from you too. So when we get there, Dave really gets into it. And he starts sharing some things I had never heard him share. And he said, women, I don't know if you know this, but you're men, and every guy goes through this where when we're little, we have somebody cheering for us usually. A mom, a dad, a coach, somebody, good job, and he's cheering. He goes, then we get older and we find out what we're good at. So whether it be school or sports or music, we usually have someone that's in the background cheering for us, like, you're good at this. And then he said, I played college football, so I had people cheering for me. Dave Wilson, you're the man. And you guys, I'm sitting on my stool thinking, wow, I've never thought about this before. And then he goes, and then I met Anne, and she basically says, of all the men in the world, I choose you, Dave Wilson. You're the man, and she's cheering for me. And I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. And then he said, and then we get married, and we walk in the door after a long day, and all we hear is boo, boo. And he turns and he's looking at me while he's cupping his hands and booing. And I'm looking at him like, what? What? He has never shared any of this ever with me in our lives. And so we get in the car and I'm like, what was that?
Yeah, that was sort of a long drive home, obviously. He's like, you've never said any of this. I go, I know, but man, it came out exactly how I feel on stage. And then she's like, I'm not booing you, I'm helping you. She actually said she was the Holy Spirit. That's what she said. No,
I said, I am helping you. And I might have said I'm helping the Holy Spirit too.
Okay, there we go. I love
and so
it.
what happened was I got home that day and I went before God. And I think that's the key component of going before God. I was on my knees and I said, Lord, I thought I was helping Dave. Is it true? Am I constantly booing him or critiquing him? And I felt like God said yes. And so I decided to do kind of this. I actually started to analyze, first of all, what was going on in my head. And you guys, I was constantly critiquing Dave. I was constantly seeing the whole, as you said. Like, I saw all the negatives. And then I realized not only did I see the negatives, I started talking to him about the negatives. And I also realized I very rarely complimented him or encouraged him or told him what he was doing right, because I thought, well, if I tell him what he's doing right, he'll think I'm satisfied, and then will enable him to stay the same. He won't want to get better, because I thought my critique was motivating him, and it actually made him pull away and did the opposite. And so it really started there, of just kind of going before God. And my prayer was this: God, help me to see the good and the great in my husband, and then help me to say it. And that it took a while for me to really kind of adopt. I feel like as they're doing the brain science, I felt like I had carved this driveway of neurological process of pathways in my brain of the negative, and to go to a whole new pathway of seeing the good, saying the good. It takes a while to create a new pathway.
Yes, it does. So how's she doing, Dave?
I was just going to say, I mean, that was 20 years ago, maybe even 25 years ago. I am sitting right now beside the biggest cheerleader in my life that I've ever had. She constantly affirms me, appreciates me, cheers me. That doesn't mean we don't have conflict. That doesn't mean she doesn't speak the truth, because she has to do that as well. But we all know this. Our words are powerful. Proverbs 18:21 says the power of life and death is in the tongue. And so we can destroy one another with our tongue. And she has built me up. She speaks life. I mean, again, I'm not saying she doesn't ever speak hard truths or hard things, but she has become an amazing cheerleader to me, and she's made me better. I think men are wired pretty similar. If you critique us, that doesn't motivate. When you appreciate and build us up, we rise to that and we become better. And that's probably true for women as well. Man, you respect them or love them or appreciate them, it brings out the best in one another. And a lot of marriages just tear down one another because we're hurt. And so those words just, it pushes you apart. And next thing you know, you're isolated. When you affirm and see the good in one another, it draws you together.
Well, I'll give you an example of what happened after I was doing this for a while. I'm embarrassed to share the story. Dave came home after a long day of preaching at church, and he had done 4 services, and that night he was going to bed, and he said, I feel like I'm getting all this critique about my messages at church lately. And he said, gosh, it's really bugging me. Like I'm losing my confidence. And I am so embarrassed to tell you that what came to my mind instantly was, well, if you'd spend more time in the Word, your sermons would be better. Now that came to my mind, and it was on the tip of my tongue. And normally I would have said that. But instead of letting that go, I'm take my thought captive. And here's my prayer. God, should I respond to this? Should I say anything? Just that prayer alone. Should I say anything? And if I should say anything, what should I say and when should I say it? Like that's just an ongoing prayer. When Paul says to pray without ceasing, that's what it looks like. You're talking to God all the time. And so I said, Lord, should I say anything? If I should say anything, what should I say? Give me that your perspective. And so this thought came into my mind, and I said to Dave, wow, I can't imagine the weight that you carry. Like you have thousands of people depending on your walk with God. That is such a weighty responsibility, and it must be so difficult. And it was so interesting. It was quiet. And then he pulled me to himself, hugged me. He whispered in my ear, you are my life. Now imagine how it would have gone the other way. And I had said things like that often. But I just feel like when we bring God into the picture, God is our cheerleader. He's always cheering us on as his children. And so it's kind of connecting to God, of seeing the greatness in our spouse and in our kids too.
Parents feel the pressure to parent well, but life, especially right now, makes that hard. This is why we're so excited to announce that we'll be speaking at the online Perfectly Imperfect Christian Parenting event on October 23 and 24. This completely digital event was designed for parents like us, as a time to set aside perfection and receive the practical and spiritual help we need in an easy and accessible digital format, and we're so excited to be speaking at the event. The goal is to help you check perfection at the door, or couch, and become perfectly imperfect parent God has called you to be.
We're going to be talking specifically about communication and conflict resolution. I mean, who doesn't have conflict in their marriages and with their children? But how do we actually practically teach our children how to be slow to speak, slow to anger, and quick to listen? We're going to be able to unpack that both practically and in real time. In addition to our talk, there's going to be over 40 other short consumable talks giving you practical and spiritual advice from other amazing speakers, such as Aaron and Jamie Ivey, Mark Batterson, Jonathan Pitts, and the Duck Dynasty crew. There's so many. You've got to check it out. So register today for this digital Christian parenting event. You can learn more at livingwholehearted.com and register directly there as one of our audience. And again, don't forget that this is on October 23rd and 24th, and early bird is September 15th. I think that's today. So make sure you get the early bird special.
We need words of affirmation, and we somehow forget that and I say we, meaning like I need it, Jeff needs it, you're saying you need it. We know that we're made that way. Talk to that man or woman right now who's feeling the conviction. Talk to me. Just kidding. I'm feeling very convicted here. Talk to me. Talk about So where do you go from here? If that's been your go-to, is the tip of your tongue, you've got this thought and you think you're helping the Holy Spirit by saying the truth, and maybe it's with love, but that has been the buildup of the years of marriage, and you want what you've just described, those next steps. Just walk through, speak to that person.
I think the first place to go is to God and to say, Lord, open my eyes, open my ears, and give me a picture of what this looks like. And I repent, first of all. If this has been me, I think I do this thing about being a real woman. You always hear what a real man is, but I take an acrostic. The R for the woman is a real woman releases control. And part of releasing that control is not trying to control our husbands all the time, what they're doing, what they're not doing. And so to go to before God, like, Lord, I feel like, if you feel that conviction, I feel this could be me. I give this to you, help me, I submit it to you. And then I would go to your husband and just say this, and this is a little bit loaded, but just say, I've been listening to something today, or I've been reading the word today, and I'm wondering if you feel like I have been cheering for you, or do you feel like maybe I'm critiquing you more than cheering for you? How am I doing? Would you do that, Dave? What do you think?
What I do.
Like, how would you respond if I asked you that question?
I mean, it'd be hard to be that honest, if you feel like she's booing you or critiquing you. But
men are usually nicer than women.
I mean, yeah, you'd not want to be that honest, but I think that's where you got to start. You got to start with honesty. And if you feel like he or she is cheering for you, that's awesome, and say thank you. But if you don't, you have to be honest. I mean, that's what happened when I said, I feel like you're booing me. That was a hard conversation. That's just where we were at the time. And again, that conversation led to life change. I mean, literally, our marriage got transformed over years because of that conversation. So it was a hard conversation, but man, oh man, you got to have it. And then I would just say, if you're a critiquer or you hear that from your spouse, you got to stop every day and say, how can I see the good, and speak it? When you see something good, speak it. Look for it. Catch them saying something, doing something good. Remember why you married them, what you believed in them, and speak it out loud. I mean, sometimes it's almost like, I barely see this, but don't say that. Just say, you're amazing. And that will usually spur them on. I mean, when Anne first started saying to me that I was a good man or a good husband or a dad, I initially didn't believe her. I'm like, you've never said that. You don't really believe that. And she started to believe it. And then I started to think, I am a good dad. And I wasn't even close to as good as she was saying I was, but that motivated me to be the man she said I was, that I wasn't yet. Does that make any sense? And so that
who you
it makes a lot of sense.
Who you were
exactly.
becoming.
And I became better because she saw something in me. And it's really what Ann said. God says that. God sees that. And we don't even see it in ourselves, and he actually sees us. He sees greatness in us, and he calls us to that. And your spouse can do the same thing. Call them to that, by speaking life, not death.
I've had friends where we challenge each other. This kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of where you are in the process. We're like, okay, you can't critique your spouse for 7 days. You can say nothing negative. Like even a reminder, like, hey, you haven't taken the garbage out yet. Or, like it's just zero negativity for 1 week. Can I tell you how hard that was for this small group of women? We were like, oh man, you talk about a thermometer of thinking, this is really hard. It's like learning to speak a new language. And we've done it about our teenage kids before too, and that's even harder when our kids were teenagers.
I can imagine.
But I think bringing other women or men in with you, if you're a woman, you have other women to be accountable, to be praying for you. I've even had women call me and say, hey, this is what I'm going to say to my husband. And I'm like, no, don't say it like that. And so we practice of how to say it. Isn't that crazy?
No, that's beautiful.
It's great. What you guys are talking about here, it just fits in so many ways of what we're talking about when we ask people to join us in this movement of shrinking the integrity gap. You guys have been doing that for decades between the values you preach, of course, and you love your husband and the values you lived out. You've been disciplining yourself and working on that and helping others do that with their husbands and vice versa, Dave with other men and them towards their wives, of actually showing practically how we use our words, for example, to not critique and focus on the negative or the whole, what's missing, but what they have as value and what they do well. And if we just do more of that, I think actually this world changes in significant ways, and the more the merrier. I love that you guys are about that. Thank you for that practical story.
Well, let's shift gears here for a second, as we're winding down with part one. Raising men. We started something called Courageous Girls, and we're passionate about daughters. And you guys have raised men. And even just going back to your story, Dave, where you're talking about boys growing up and having someone cheering for them all the time, and then they get married and they're like, "Oh, this is harder. I don't have someone cheering me on all the time." Give some tips that you've learned or things you would suggest not to do that you learned the hard way when it comes to raising boys and helping them be men. We're going to dive into a whole different direction.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, when Ann and I became parents, we've been married 6 years at that point. And, initially we thought, man, we got marriage down, so now parenting will be easy. We're all laughing because we didn't have marriage down and parenting was the hardest thing we'd ever done. And, my background is I came from a broken family. My mom and dad were divorced when I was 7 years old. My dad had girlfriends and mistresses, and my parents were alcoholics. So I came from this sort of shattered family, and my dad was never around after me being 7 years old. He left. He never really came back. I saw him maybe 2 or 3 times for a couple days a year most of my life. And so I become a dad and I have no idea. I literally was like, I don't even know what it looks like. I don't really have a relationship with my dad. I never had one around. And so, I had to go to the men in my church really and look at the Word of God and say, what's a godly man and a husband and a dad look like? And then try to live it out. And now, we're grandparents of 5 kids. All 3 of our sons are married, and they're perfect. And I had a perfect, I was the perfect dad. No,
I'm tipping my hat to you right now.
Obviously we're laughing because, it was a journey. And even now, still as a father of adult sons now, we have conversations about where I missed it, as a dad with them growing up. But I think the biggest, we just wrote a parenting book that's coming out in April. And so we talked about a lot of this, but I think one of the biggest things that I would say to a parent, a mom or dad, is be fully present and engaged, especially with sons. They are wanting to know if they're a man and who sees them and believes in them and thinks they have what it takes to be a man, whether they're 13 or 23. And I'm telling you, my wife, Ann, was the best boy mom ever. She was amazing in terms of just the way she spoke life into our sons, but also understood their need for adventure and risk and taking risk and becoming, becoming men. And so Ann did just a tremendous job really bringing that out of them.
Basically, what he's saying is that when Dave was risky with our boys on jet skis or snowboards, and he was doing these crazy things, and I thought they were going to die, I would basically walk in the house and pray.
That's awesome.
Because that is so true. And it goes back to what you were saying with not being controlling, right?
Because I was scared at times. Like, okay, this looks really dumb. What you guys are doing looks very scary and unsafe. And they all lived.
Dumb is a good word.
They all lived in, it's miraculous at times, I think, and Dave, that was big for him. They climbed things and it was just big, and the boys loved it. They really loved it.
Connect that to manhood. Help the mom and dad who are raising these young boys, and the overprotective mom or the dad who's trying to listen to his wife. How is risking an adventure connect them to manhood in the long run?
I would say, and I'm sure this is true of girls and women as well. We didn't raise any girls, so I don't know that for sure. We have a granddaughter now, and it's just an amazing journey to understand how different it is raising a little girl. But I know for boys, they have to be able to take risks to find out, they're trying to answer that question, do I have what it takes? And so it does get scary at times because you're going to have to be able to step back and say, okay, it is okay for him to climb up that jungle gym at the top. And of course, you're not going to do things that are going to get them seriously hurt. But at the same time, you got to be able to, like you were saying before, release control and trust God and let them take risks to become a man at 10, 11, 12, 14 years old, and not feel like they're not allowed to adventure. And so, I mean, we did all kinds of crazy things, from camping in the woods, going on ski trips and snowboarding and playing all kinds of crazy sports and slip and slides in the backyards and you name it, go-karts, all that stuff. In some ways it was fun, but at the other side of it, it was like we're letting boys sort of stretch themselves to find out what it means to be a man. And of course, it isn't just that. That's just one small part of it, but it's actually a big part of them discovering that they do have what it takes, and that when they've taken risk as a 12-year-old, they can take similar risk when they're 22.
And I would say our sons have, they're not perfect by any means because their parents aren't perfect, but they do. They're not afraid to try things. Do you know what I mean? They're not afraid to do new things. They're not afraid to stretch themselves. And as a mom, especially as single moms, I think it's good to have some good Christian men in their lives who can do that in a way that a woman maybe can't.
Well, it's so cool. One of the things, I share that same heart and spirit, Dave, that you described with your boys, and I'm trying to do that even with my daughters. But for sure, as a son and having experienced the journey into developing into a man, adventure and recreation is a huge part of the learning space, right? That allows us to get some wins at a very important time in our formative development, that then gives us confidence to go into new territory, completely unknown, like emotional intimacy and spiritual intimacy. And that's a whole new frontier. And because we have confidence in other things that we've done, that we can lean into that. And God gives us that ability to lean into those new territories. And then when we get married, learning how to live and meet needs and engage outside of recreational companionship. We lean back to those early memories of, I got this, I can do this. Speak to that for a second.
Yeah, one of the things that helped me develop even a vision of what manhood looked like was we developed what Ann mentioned, the 4 pillars of womanhood. We first developed what we call the 4 pillars of manhood, which was, a lot of it was based on Robert Lewis's content from Men's Fraternity. But one of those pillars of a real man, REAL, is a real man rejects passivity. And I think it's really easy as a man, and I'm sure it's true for a woman as well, just to be passive in life and not step in to areas that you need to, be active in. And so even as a dad, it was easy for me to be passive with my boys rather than step in and say, okay, my role is to help cultivate them into a man and not watch. I remember early when our kids were literally like little toddlers, we were at a jungle gym. And we got there, and Ann goes on the jungle gym with, I think, 2 or 3. I don't know if all 3 were there, but they were 4 or 5 years old. And they're playing on the jungle gym, and I'm sitting on the bench watching, and I'm honestly having this thought, wow, this is awesome. I'm a dad. I've got 2 boys. My wife's over there playing with them. This is awesome. And all of a sudden, Ann comes over and sits down right beside me, and she goes, hey, so what are you doing? I'm like, what do you mean? This is
Yeah.
great. I'm watching. She goes, do you want to be one of those dads that watches? Or are you going to get over here in the jungle gym and play with your boys? I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe I should do that. I mean, I didn't even realize that I was being a passive dad, and most of the dads were sitting watching while the moms were doing the stuff. And I learned that day from my wife, because she, by the way, had an amazing dad who was involved in their life. I remember, and again, I'm glad I learned that lesson early. It's like, no, I'm going to be the dad that's playing with my kids. I'm going to be the dad that's, on the field coaching them when they're in high school. And that's why I started coaching high school football, so I could coach my sons. And, I became the dad in the neighborhood that all the kids would run down to our front door. They'd literally knock on the front door and say, "Can Mr. Wilson come out and play?"
They really did.
Because I was going to be that
That's
dad. I wanted to be involved.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, this is so good. Let's continue this dialogue. And some of the things that I'm hearing you kind of full circle is just the things that we're doing and raising our young men are setting them up for marriage. And going back to Adam and Eve, right? Where passivity is that pull for men and control for Eve,
Exactly.
right? She's gonna get the apple and she's gonna make it happen. And so that those two propensities for us and how to really ask the Lord for help. You guys have two books. One is The Vertical Marriage. Make sure you pick that up today, couples, if you're wanting to lean towards learning how to lean into what God is doing in your life and Him being your cheerleader. And then what's the name of your new book coming out?
The name is going to be No Perfect Parents. No Perfect
I love
Parents.
It doesn't come out till April.
No perfect.
Comes out in April, yeah.
Okay, so that's coming. That's coming. We're excited. We're going to dive in more to what it's been like for you in your pastoral leadership. Thank you so much for all that you are doing to lead and to help other marriages. You are a dynamic couple, and I'm already just in the little bit we've sat here, I've already been impacted. I think the Holy Spirit's been speaking to me. So thank you.
I'm excited for round 2.
This podcast is powered by Living Wholehearted, Courageous Girls, and the Christian Parenting Podcast Network. Thank you for joining us in this critical movement of shrinking our integrity gaps between what we preach and live.